Lily had always carried an undeniable charm, the kind of presence that could light up a room. When I first met her, she was juggling college classes and a part-time job at a local diner, working toward a future she believed in. I admired her ambition and her spark, even as I worked long hours welding to support us both. I never hesitated to do my part. She was my partner, and I believed we were building a life together, one forged on trust and sacrifice. Marrying her felt like the natural next step. I still remember how proud I felt as we exchanged vows in that small chapel, surrounded by family and friends. I was determined to give her everything she needed to succeed, and for a while, it seemed like we were in sync. I worked extra shifts to help cover tuition and bills, even skipping out on things I wanted, all so Lily could focus on her studies and future career. Things began to shift when Lily landed her first job at a prestigious downtown law firm. I couldn't have been prouder, at least at first. She deserved the success after all her hard work. But with her new job came a new crowd, people who saw the world differently than we did. They were polished, ambitious, and a little too quick to judge. Among them was Veronica, a senior lawyer who became Lily's mentor. From the first time I heard about Veronica, I felt uneasy. There was something about the way Lily described her, this mixture of admiration and intimidation. It planted a seed of doubt I couldn't ignore. The changes in Lily were subtle at first. She started spending more time at work events, saying they were essential for networking. She came home late, her eyes glowing with the excitement of high-profile conversations and new opportunities. I wanted to be happy for her, but it became clear that she was growing distant. The warmth that once defined our relationship was being replaced by something colder, more calculating. Her newfound confidence, which I had once admired, began to sting. Comments about my work as a welder started slipping into conversations. Small jabs that felt like they came from someone else entirely. I could see Veronica's influence in her words and demeanor. The way Lily carried herself around me now hinted at a growing condescension, as though I no longer fit into the world she was carving out for herself. One evening, I found a crumpled receipt from an upscale restaurant stuffed into the pocket of Lily's blazer. The total on it was enough to cover a week's worth of groceries. It stood out because we hadn't been on a proper date in months, let alone to a place like that. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off with the kind of dismissiveness I had grown used to, chalking it up to work obligations. The explanation left me unsettled. I could feel the foundation of our relationship shifting beneath my feet, but I didn't want to confront it head-on. I told myself it was temporary, a phase brought on by the demands of her new career. Still, the doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of my trust. The moments of connection between us grew fewer and further apart. I started to feel like a shadow in my own home, watching as Lily drifted further into a world where I no longer seemed to belong. Our conversations became shallow, filled with half-truths and dismissals. I wanted to believe things would get better, that we could find our way back to the partnership we once had. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. Lily wasn't just building her career, she was building a life that didn't include me. And even as I fought to hold on, I could feel her letting go. Lily's late nights became more frequent, her once warm and welcoming presence at home now replaced by a strained indifference. The space between us grew wider, filled with unanswered questions and unspoken truths. I started to notice things, small details that, at first, seemed inconsequential but began to paint a clearer picture. She had a new wardrobe, filled with expensive outfits far beyond what we could reasonably afford. Her style, once simple and practical, now reflected the kind of glamour that matched the high-profile world she inhabited at work. It wasn't just the clothes, there were other subtle changes. Her perfume, the way she styled her hair, and the jewelry I had never seen before. These weren't the choices of someone who still prioritized the life we had built together. Then there was her phone. She had always been open with it before, leaving it on the counter or sofa without a second thought. Now it was glued to her hand, the screen angled away whenever I walked by. Notifications came in constantly, and her responses were quick, followed by the lock screen. It felt like there was a part of her life I was no longer privy to, a piece she had carved out and hidden away. Despite the growing doubts, I held back from accusing her of anything outright. I didn't want to be the husband who jumped to conclusions, who let suspicion poison what might still be salvageable. I kept telling myself that she was just caught up in the pressures of her new career, that the distance between us was temporary. But the weight in my chest told me otherwise. The weekends, once our sacred time to unwind and reconnect, were now spent apart. Lily claimed she needed to catch up on work, and I didn't argue. I stayed home, tinkering in the garage or catching up on chores, trying to push the creeping doubts to the back of my mind. But every time I glanced at my phone, hoping for a call or even a text from her, The silence confirmed what I feared. I was no longer a priority. One evening, a neighbor mentioned seeing Lily downtown, laughing and walking arm in arm with another woman and two men outside an upscale lounge. I thanked them for the heads up, brushing it off as something work-related, but inside, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. She hadn't mentioned going out that night, let alone with anyone else. The next morning, I casually asked about her evening. Her answer came quickly, too quickly, as if it had been rehearsed. She mentioned staying late at the office, finishing a project with Veronica. There was no mention of the lounge, no mention of anything that would explain the laughter my neighbor had described. I didn't press her, but the gnawing suspicion grew stronger. A part of me wanted to believe her, to trust in the vows we had made. After all, this was the woman I had devoted my life to, the one I had supported through every challenge and milestone. But her actions spoke louder than her words, and they were telling a story I didn't want to face. It wasn't long before I noticed our finances taking a hit. Lily's income had improved, but our joint account was being drained faster than I could replenish it. Expenses listed as miscellaneous or entertainment began to appear, each one adding to the mountain of questions I was too afraid to ask. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe these were legitimate work expenses or gifts for clients. But the truth was, I didn't want to know. Knowing would mean acknowledging what I had been trying to avoid, that the woman I loved might be betraying me. I started keeping a journal, jotting down the little things that didn't add up. It wasn't about building a case against her, it was about trying to make sense of the chaos in my head. I needed to see it all laid out, to understand where things had gone wrong and whether there was still a way to fix it. But with each entry, the truth became harder to ignore. The Lily I had married, the one who had shared my dreams and struggles, was slipping away. And I was left grasping at the edges of a life that no longer felt like mine. The distance between us grew so wide that it felt like Lily and I were living separate lives under the same roof. Conversations became perfunctory, limited to logistics and surface-level pleasantries. The warmth, the intimacy, the shared dreams, all of it seemed to have disappeared into the void. Still, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. I told myself I needed proof, something undeniable before I dared to open that Pandora's box. That proof came in the most unexpected way. One evening, Lily announced she would be attending a weekend work retreat with Veronica and a few colleagues. It wasn't unusual for her to mention these last-minute trips, but something about this one felt different. Her explanation was rushed, her demeanor distant, and when she left, her goodbye was hollow, a quick wave as she disappeared out the door. I spent the weekend in the garage, working on an old motorcycle that had been collecting dust. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but thoughts of Lily and her retreat kept creeping in. What kind of work retreat required her to leave so abruptly? Who else was there? My gut told me to stop rationalizing and start paying attention. The following week, a package arrived at our door addressed to me. There was no return address, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. Inside was a plain manila envelope containing a stack of photos. My hands shook as I flipped through them. Each image was worse than the last. Lily, dressed to the nines, leaning close to a man who was most definitely not a colleague. The two of them were at what appeared to be a hotel bar, their expressions too familiar, too intimate. At the bottom of the stack was a note written in the same unfamiliar hand. "You deserve to know the truth." I felt a mix of rage and despair, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was real, tangible, undeniable. But the question lingered: who had sent the photos? Someone from her office? A disgruntled acquaintance? And why now? In the days that followed, I found myself scrutinizing every interaction Lily and I had ever had, searching for the signs I had missed. The little lies she had told, the excuses, the unexplained expenses, it all came rushing back, each piece fitting into a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. But what haunted me most was the growing realization that this betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. There was something more, something darker, lurking beneath the surface. My suspicions were confirmed when Lily and Veronica invited me to what they called a relaxing evening at their friend's house. They insisted I come along, saying it would be good for us as a couple. At first, I thought it might be an attempt to patch things up, but as the evening unfolded, it became clear I was being set up. The house was sprawling and sterile, filled with strangers who looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. Drinks flowed freely, and I soon found myself nursing one too many, though I couldn't recall ever feeling drunk. My memory of the night became hazy, fragmented. Snippets of laughter, flashes of conversation, they all blurred together. The next morning, I woke up disoriented, my head pounding and my body aching. I was sprawled on a couch in a room I didn't recognize. Lily was nowhere to be found. My clothes were rumpled, My phone missing. Slowly, pieces of the night came back to me. A humiliating series of events orchestrated by Lily and Veronica, designed to demean me in front of their so-called friends. I stumbled out of the house and made my way home, my mind swirling with shame and anger. Lily returned later that afternoon, acting as though nothing had happened. When I confronted her, she brushed it off, claiming I had just drunk too much and embarrassed myself. But I knew better. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move, another step in a game I hadn't realized I was playing. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was public, a deliberate attempt to humiliate and undermine me. And as much as it hurt, it also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. After that night, the cracks in my world were impossible to ignore. Every time I looked at Lily, all I could see was the calculated cruelty of her actions, the betrayal that went far beyond mere infidelity. It wasn't just that she had been unfaithful. It was the way she had orchestrated my humiliation, turning me into a punchline among strangers I didn't even know. I couldn't pretend anymore. The woman I had once believed in, the one I had built a life with, was gone. The tension between us became unbearable. Lily acted as though everything was normal, flashing her polished smile and humming to herself as if she didn't have a care in the world. I, on the other hand, could barely contain my anger. I avoided her as much as possible, keeping to the garage or working late just to stay out of the house. It was the only way I could keep from exploding. My breaking point came when I discovered the full extent of the financial damage she and Veronica had inflicted. I had been too trusting, letting Lily handle most of our joint accounts while I focused on earning the money. When I finally forced myself to go through the statements, I found months, years, of transactions I couldn't explain. Lavish dinners, high-end boutiques, and hotel stays in cities I'd never visited. The money I had worked so hard to save, the future I thought we were building together, it was all gone. I confronted her with the evidence one evening, laying the statements out on the kitchen table like a prosecutor presenting his case. Lily barely flinched. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression one of annoyance rather than guilt. She claimed it was all part of her networking, and that I was being overly dramatic. She even had the audacity to suggest that I should be grateful for her ambition, as if her betrayal was some kind of gift. Her dismissal was the final straw. Any lingering hope I had for reconciliation evaporated in that moment. I realized I wasn't just dealing with a cheating spouse. I was dealing with someone who had no respect for me, no remorse for the damage she had caused. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't even tell her where I was going. I didn't owe her that. I drove aimlessly for hours before ending up at the home of an old friend, Mark Daniels. Mark and I had drifted apart over the years, but he was the kind of friend you could always count on when things went south. He didn't ask too many questions when he opened the door and saw the state I was in. He just nodded, patted my shoulder, and let me in. Staying at Mark's place gave me a chance to breathe, to think about what I needed to do next. He didn't pry, but he let me talk when I was ready. I told him everything, about the photos, the financial betrayal, and the setup at the party. Mark listened quietly, his face growing darker with every word. When I finished, he shook his head and told me something I hadn't realized I needed to hear. I didn't deserve any of this. It was through Mark that I reconnected with Natalie, his younger sister. I had known her years ago, back when we were all just kids hanging out in the same circles. Natalie had always been kind-hearted and straightforward, the kind of person who saw through the noise and got straight to the truth. Seeing her again was like a lifeline, a reminder that there were still good people in the world. Natalie didn't push me to open up, but she didn't let me wallow either. She had a quiet way of encouraging me, nudging me toward the realization that I couldn't just let Lily and Veronica destroy me. I had to fight back, not just for my dignity but for my future. With Mark and Natalie's support, I began to piece together a plan. The first step was cutting Lily off financially. I contacted the bank, closed our joint accounts, and set up a new one in my name alone. It wasn't much. Lily had already drained most of our savings, but it was a start. I also started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Photos, financial records, and anything else that could prove what she and Veronica had done. I didn't know yet how I was going to use it, but I wanted to be ready. The second step was regaining my strength. For too long, I had let Lily's betrayal define me, chipping away at my confidence and self-worth. Natalie helped me see that I couldn't let her win. I started focusing on my work again, pouring my energy into the projects I had neglected. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the man Lily had tried to destroy, but the man I had always been before her betrayal. The fallout from Lily's actions had shaken me to my core, but it had also given me clarity. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about rebuilding, about finding a way forward that didn't include her or the wreckage she had left behind. And with Mark and Natalie by my side, I knew I wouldn't have to face it alone. Once I started looking, the threads of Lily's betrayal unraveled faster than I expected. Her facade of confidence and control hid a mess far more tangled than I could have imagined. Every receipt, every unexplained charge, every late-night work event revealed something new. I didn't just find a betrayal. I found layers of manipulation and lies that stretched back further than I wanted to admit. It was Natalie who first suggested digging deeper into Veronica's role in all of this. She pointed out that Lily's behavior had shifted so drastically after meeting her that it was impossible to ignore the connection. I wasn't sure where to start, but Natalie had an idea. She called a mutual acquaintance who worked in tech, someone with a knack for finding information people wanted to keep hidden. Within days, we had more than we bargained for. Veronica wasn't just a bad influence. She was deeply entrenched in shady dealings that went far beyond professional mentoring. Her so-called networking events often doubled as private gatherings where deals were made under the table, and reputations were quietly ruined. It wasn't hard to see how Lily had been swept into her orbit. What surprised me was just how much Lily had embraced that world. There were messages between her and Veronica that outlined a deliberate plan to isolate me, to undermine my confidence and create a narrative where I was the problem. They joked about the night at the party, calling it a small price to pay for whatever goals they were working toward. Reading those messages was like taking a punch to the gut. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had plotted it, step by step. As I pieced together the evidence, I realized this wasn't just personal anymore. Veronica's network included clients and colleagues who would be very interested in what I had uncovered. Lily had gotten in over her head, and now she was tangled in a web she couldn't control. The weight of everything I'd learned was overwhelming, but it also gave me purpose. This wasn't just about confronting Lily or trying to make her see the damage she'd done. This was about exposing the truth and holding her and Veronica accountable. Mark helped me strategize. He suggested focusing on what would hit them hardest, their reputations. Together, we started compiling a dossier of everything we'd uncovered: photos, financial records, and the messages between Lily and Veronica. I didn't want to weaponize it recklessly. I wanted to make sure it would count. Meanwhile, Natalie became my anchor. She didn't just offer support. She reminded me of the kind of life I could have once this was all behind me. She saw me for who I was, not the broken man Lily had tried to turn me into. Her quiet confidence and unwavering belief in me gave me the strength to keep going, even when the weight of it all threatened to drag me down. The turning point came one afternoon when I was alone at Mark's place, sifting through the growing mountain of evidence. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from Lily. She claimed she wanted to talk, to clear the air and make things right. Her words were carefully chosen, likely rehearsed, but I knew better. This wasn't an olive branch, it was a lifeline for her. She had no idea how much I already knew. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called Mark and Natalie to discuss the next steps. They both agreed it was time to confront her, but not on her terms. We needed to control the narrative, to make sure she and Veronica couldn't spin the situation to their advantage. Over the next few days, I prepared for the confrontation. Every piece of evidence was organized, every loose end tied up. I wasn't going into this blind. I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of it or manipulate me into doubting myself. This time, I was ready. The day of the confrontation arrived with an eerie calm. I had spent the morning going over every detail, making sure I had everything I needed to lay the truth bare. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control over my life and exposing the lies that had twisted it into something unrecognizable. Lily agreed to meet me at our house, a place that felt more like a battlefield than a home now. I arrived early and sat at the dining table, the envelope of evidence in front of me. My hands rested on it like a shield. It was strange to think that something so small could hold the power to unravel the life we had built, or what I thought we had built. When Lily walked in, she looked polished, composed, every bit the confident professional she had become. But there was a tension in her posture, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She tried to mask it with a small smile, asking how I'd been, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. I didn't respond. I motioned for her to sit across from me. As she settled into the chair, I slid the envelope across the table. Her smile faltered as she stared at it. Without a word, she opened it and began flipping through the contents. I watched her face closely, saw the moment recognition dawned, followed by something that looked like fear. She tried to speak, to explain, but I held up a hand to stop her. This wasn't a discussion. I wasn't here to hear her excuses or lies. I laid out everything, every expense, every text, every photo. I talked about the humiliation at the party, the calculated cruelty of her actions. I told her I knew about Veronica's schemes and how she had willingly become a part of them. Lily's defenses crumbled as the weight of the evidence bore down on her. She tried to deny some of it, claiming that I had misunderstood, that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the words rang hollow. She couldn't escape the truth staring back at her from the pages of that envelope. When I mentioned the financial betrayal, her expression shifted. She seemed less concerned with the ethics of what she had done and more worried about the consequences. I told her I had already closed our joint accounts and spoken to a lawyer. Her face paled at that, and I knew I had struck a nerve. She asked what I wanted, her tone desperate now. Did I want an apology? A promise to change? She claimed she could fix this, that we could still salvage something. But her words only revealed how little she understood. This wasn't something that could be fixed. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself. I told her I wanted freedom. Freedom from her lies, from her manipulation, from the life she had poisoned. I told her I was filing for divorce and that I would be pursuing every legal avenue to protect myself from the financial damage she had caused. Her composure shattered then, and for the first time, I saw the person beneath the polished exterior, scared, cornered, and grasping at straws. She tried to turn the tables, accusing me of being controlling, of not supporting her ambitions. She claimed I had pushed her into Veronica's arms by not understanding her world. But her arguments felt rehearsed, like she had prepared them for this exact moment. They didn't land. I didn't bite. When she realized I wasn't going to budge, her demeanor shifted again. She became defensive, accusing me of wanting to ruin her life. I told her calmly that she had done that herself. All I had done was expose it. The confrontation ended not with a dramatic climax, but with a quiet finality. I gathered my things and left, leaving her sitting at the table with the evidence of her betrayal spread out before her. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: anger, relief, and the faintest glimmer of hope. This was the beginning of the end, but it was also the start of something new. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking back control. Lily and Veronica had tried to tear me down, but I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. The aftermath of the confrontation was a whirlwind of chaos and clarity. Lily, once so composed and calculated, was unraveling. The carefully constructed image she had cultivated, the poised professional, the devoted wife, was crumbling under the weight of her exposed lies. She called me incessantly in the days that followed, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between anger and desperation. Sometimes she begged for forgiveness, promising to change, insisting we could rebuild what we'd lost. Other times, her tone was bitter and accusatory, blaming me for airing out our dirty laundry, for taking control of the narrative she had worked so hard to craft. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on securing my future. The lawyer I'd hired, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, was relentless in her pursuit of fairness. She combed through every financial record, every legal loophole, ensuring Lily and Veronica's schemes wouldn't leave me destitute. Sarah advised me to be patient, to let the process unfold methodically, and I trusted her judgment. Meanwhile, the cracks in Veronica's empire began to show. The evidence I had gathered wasn't just damaging on a personal level. It threatened to expose professional misconduct that could ruin her career. Quietly, I began leaking select pieces of information to the right people. Colleagues of Veronica's who had clashed with her, clients who had been burned by her manipulations. The impact was immediate. Whispers about Veronica's misconduct began to circulate. Meetings were cancelled. Partnerships dissolved. She tried to fight back, leaning on her connections and influence, but the foundation of her power was shaky. She had built her success on manipulation and deceit, and now it was turning against her. Lily, who had tied herself so closely to Veronica's success, found herself caught in the fallout. It was Mark who called me one evening with an update on the situation. He had heard through his network that Lily's position at the firm was being quietly re-evaluated. Veronica was under scrutiny, and Lily, as her protégé, was now a liability. It seemed the walls were closing in on both of them. While Lily's professional life unraveled, my personal life was finding new footing. Natalie became a constant presence, her quiet strength a steadying force. She didn't push me to move faster than I was ready, but her presence was a reminder that life could still hold joy and connection, even after so much betrayal. One afternoon, while we were sitting on Mark's porch, Natalie shared a story about her own struggles. How she had once trusted someone who betrayed her, how she had rebuilt her life piece by piece. Her words stuck with me. She wasn't trying to compare her pain to mine. She was showing me that there was life beyond the wreckage. And for the first time in months, I believed her. The divorce proceedings were slow but deliberate. Lily tried to fight back, to salvage what she could, but the evidence against her left her with little leverage. The financial mismanagement, the infidelity, the calculated attempts to humiliate me, it all painted a clear picture, one the court couldn't ignore. Sarah ensured that I came out of it with what I needed to rebuild, and for that, I was deeply grateful. In the end, Lily lost more than just the marriage. Her career took a hit she couldn't recover from, and her association with Veronica tarnished her reputation. Veronica, too, faced significant consequences, both professionally and personally. Their downfall wasn't just satisfying, it was a reminder that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're untouchable. As I watched the pieces of my old life fall away, I felt a strange sense of peace. The pain of Lily's betrayal would always be a part of my story, but it didn't define me anymore. With Natalie's support and Mark's unwavering friendship, I began to see the outlines of a new life taking shape. A life built on honesty, resilience, and the kind of connections that truly mattered. With the divorce finalized, a strange calm settled over my life. It wasn't the kind of peace that erased the pain, but a relief that came from knowing the worst was finally over. I no longer lived under the shadow of Lily's betrayal or Veronica's manipulations. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but mine to shape. Word of Lily's departure filtered back through mutual connections. She had left town, moving out of state in search of a clean slate where her name wouldn't be tied to the fallout. Veronica, once untouchable in her circle, had been brought low by the weight of her actions. Her career, her reputation, and the power she wielded had crumbled, leaving her as another cautionary tale. In the weeks that followed, Mark remained my anchor. His steady presence gave me space to process what had happened while keeping me grounded in the reality that life didn't stop because of past wounds. He reminded me that while Lily and Veronica had made their choices, I still had the power to shape my own. Natalie offered a different kind of support. She didn't focus on what had been lost or push me to move on. Instead, she encouraged me to look inward, to rediscover the things that once gave my life meaning. Her quiet confidence and calm presence became a source of strength I hadn't realized I needed. A simple suggestion from Natalie shifted my perspective. She invited me to join her on a hike, a chance to clear my head and reconnect with nature. The steep trail challenged my endurance, but the view at the summit took my breath away. Standing at the top, overlooking rolling hills bathed in golden light, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. It was small and tentative, but it was there, like an ember refusing to burn out. On the hike back down, I reflected on the dreams I had abandoned over the years. I had poured so much of myself into supporting Lily and her ambitions that I had forgotten my own. The realization was sobering, but it also sparked something inside me, a desire to rebuild, not just out of necessity but out of purpose. Over the following weeks, Natalie's determination became contagious. She shared her long-held dream of starting a business, something she had always wanted but never pursued. Her openness inspired me to consider my own path, to think about how I could turn my skills and experience into something meaningful. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future untethered from the weight of betrayal. Mark, ever the practical thinker, proposed combining my expertise in welding with Natalie's ideas. The three of us spent evenings tossing around concepts and exploring possibilities. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. It wasn't just about building a business, it was about reclaiming control and finding joy in the process. As the pieces started coming together, I felt a flicker of excitement, a feeling I thought I had lost forever. Life wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would remain, but they no longer defined me. Surrounded by people I trusted, I felt ready to take the first steps toward a future I could finally call my own. The decision to start the business with Natalie and Mark was like stepping into uncharted territory. It wasn't just about turning a profit, it was about reclaiming my identity and proving to myself that I could create something worthwhile again. The idea was simple yet ambitious, combining my welding expertise with Natalie's eye for design to craft custom metalwork for homes and businesses. Mark, with his knack for organization, took on the logistical side of things, ensuring we stayed on track. We started small, working out of Mark's garage with borrowed tools and a shoestring budget. Every piece we created was a testament to the effort we poured into it. Natalie's designs were innovative and elegant, blending practicality with artistry. My welding brought them to life, shaping raw materials into something tangible and beautiful. It was exhausting work, but for the first time in years, it felt fulfilling. Word spread slowly at first, mostly through friends and family. Mark handled the social media side, showcasing our creations and reaching potential clients. Each new order felt like a victory, a small but significant step toward something bigger. With every project we completed, my confidence grew, and so did the bond between the three of us. This wasn't just a business, it was a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. As the business began to pick up momentum, so did the clarity in my personal life. With each day that passed, the weight of my past with Lily felt lighter. I no longer replayed the betrayals in my mind or agonized over what I could have done differently. The scars were still there, but they no longer dictated how I saw myself or my future. Natalie became an integral part of my healing, though not in a way that felt forced or rushed. Her presence was steady and natural, like a quiet reminder that good things could still exist. Working alongside her every day, I found myself appreciating the small moments, the shared laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her ideas, the way she believed in what we were building. Mark noticed the growing connection between us but never commented on it outright. He didn't need to. The support he gave was unspoken but unwavering, a testament to the kind of friend he had always been. Together, the three of us created a rhythm that felt right, balancing the demands of the business with the need for occasional breaks to recharge. One evening, after finishing a particularly challenging project, the three of us sat in the garage, sipping drinks and reflecting on how far we'd come. The conversation drifted to dreams for the future, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could participate without hesitation. I talked about expanding the business, about the kind of life I wanted to lead, one rooted in integrity and surrounded by people I trusted. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something had shifted. The anger and bitterness that had consumed me for so long had been replaced by a sense of purpose. The life I was building now wasn't an escape from the pain of the past. It was a declaration that I had survived it. Each day brought new challenges, but they felt manageable now. With Natalie and Mark by my side, I had found a way to turn the wreckage of my old life into a foundation for something better. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about proving to myself that I could move forward, stronger and more determined than ever. Months turned into a year, and the business blossomed in ways I hadn't dared to imagine when we first started. What began as a small operation in Mark's garage evolved into something bigger. A rented workshop, a growing client list, and even a feature in a local magazine that brought us more attention than we were prepared for. It wasn't just about the success. It was about the sense of accomplishment that came from building something from the ground up. Through it all, my relationship with Natalie deepened. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a gradual unfolding, like a flower blooming at its own pace. The trust we built during the hard days of starting the business laid the foundation for something more. She wasn't just my partner in work, she became my partner in life, someone who saw me for who I truly was and never once tried to change me. Our bond grew quietly, without fanfare, as we spent more time together. Whether we were brainstorming new ideas, tackling challenges, or simply sharing a meal after a long day, there was an ease between us that I hadn't felt in years. She didn't just understand me, she believed in me, and that made all the difference. Eventually, I found the courage to bring her into my world in a more permanent way. One evening, as we closed up the workshop, I told her I wanted us to build a life together beyond the business. She didn't hesitate. Her smile in that moment felt like an answer to every doubt I had ever carried. It wasn't about replacing what had been lost. It was about creating something new, something better. Mark, ever the supportive friend, gave us his blessing with his characteristic humor, joking that he would only approve if we promised not to turn the workshop into a romantic retreat. His presence in our lives remained a steadying force, and I knew I could never repay him for everything he had done for me. The days of bitterness and betrayal felt like a distant memory as I embraced the life I was rebuilding. Lily and Veronica no longer occupied my thoughts. The scars they left were still there, but they were no longer open wounds. Instead, they served as reminders of how far I had come, and how much I had grown. Natalie and I eventually moved into a modest home not far from the workshop, a space that felt truly ours. We kept it simple, focusing on what mattered most. Creating a life filled with honesty, respect, and joy. The kind of life I had once thought was out of reach. As time went on, I found myself looking back on everything that had happened with a sense of gratitude, not for the pain but for the lessons it taught me. Lily's betrayal had broken me, but it had also pushed me to rebuild, to become stronger, more self-reliant, and more open to the people who truly cared about me. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And as I stood in the workshop one morning, Watching the sunlight stream through the windows onto the projects we had yet to finish, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. This was the life I had fought for, the life I had built with my own hands and the support of people who believed in me. It wasn't about revenge or erasing the past. It was about proving to myself that even after the darkest of storms, there was always the chance for a brighter day.